I tried so hard to be part of this family, but tonight I realized I never truly belonged.
Just sit quietly. This dinner isn't about you.
Some seats are earned, not simply married into.
I never came here for your money. I only wanted a family.
In the painting, they had replaced me with a dog. Not moved to the back. Not shrunk behind Preston's shoulder where I had stood for 2 hours last August in shoes that cut into my heels. Replaced. In the space where I had been, between my husband and his mother, there was a liver and white spaniel sitting on the grass with its tongue out, and somebody had taken the trouble to paint the light coming through its ears. 22 people were at that table, long enough that the florist had needed 2 centerpieces to keep the middle from looking bare. I was at the far end, near the children, where my place card had been moved without anybody telling me. Vivian held the cloth in one hand. She had pulled it away the way you pull a plaster off a child, and she let it fall over her forearm like a waiter's towel. 8 feet across, lit from above by 2 brass picture lamps she had installed that afternoon. Ashford Maritime Group, 100 years on the Cooper River, 4 generations in one frame, and my husband's hand resting on the head of a dog that died in 2019. Somebody laughed. That is the part one want you to hear, because the laugh came before anyone had time to decide whether it was funny. It came out of Blythe's husband, into his napkin, a short wet sound like a cough swallowed wrong. Then it stopped, and the room understood what it had just done and went quiet in a way that was worse. I did not stand. I did not make a sound. I have spent 15 years in rooms where people are dying, and I know that the loudest thing you can do is stay still. I looked down that table at Preston and waited for him to look back, and he did, and for about a second and a half I thought he was going to fix it. I said his name. Just his name, quietly, the way you say it in church. He put down his fork, tines down, at an angle, the way his mother taught him. He folded his hands on the linen. He did not look at me. He looked at the peonies in the middle of the table, at all of them, and he said, "Marlee understands she's a guest here." 11 years. 1 wedding at Second Presbyterian with 300 people. 1 daughter with his chin and my hands. For Christmases nursing his grandfather through pneumonia when the private nurses would not come out in the rain. And that was the sentence. Not shouted. Explained, the way you explain a policy to a customer. That was when my phone started buzzing against my thigh. 3 short pulses through the fabric of a navy dress Vivian had once called sensible. Unknown number, Charleston prefix, 9:40 at night on a Tuesday. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. There were 4 things on that table I did not understand yet, and every one of them came back for me later. The first was the chair. Cordelia Hall has 18 dining chairs from a house on Laguerre Street, and 2 made to match them in the 60s, and the 2 new ones are colder. I had sat in one of them at every family dinner for 11 years and never mentioned it. And I bring it up because nobody put me there by accident. Somebody had worked out, years ago, which chairs were cold. That is the family I married into. They never needed to raise their voices, because they had already thought about the furniture. The second was in my handbag on the back of that chair. A laminated badge on a blue lanyard, the sort the volunteers wear at the Maritime Museum on Concord Street, with my name printed as Marlee Ashford. Vivian had handed it to me in front of 11 people in a box with tissue paper and said, "So you'll never have to explain yourself at the door again, sugar." The lanyard smelled of the printer. It had been made that week. She had spelled my name wrong on purpose, and I had said thank you and smiled with my whole face, and I have thought about that smile more than almost anything else that happened that night. The third was a manila folder under Grady Whitlock's water glass, which is where a man puts a document when he wants you to see the corner and not the front. Grady has been the family's lawyer since before Preston could drive. Beautiful gray beard, cufflinks with the house flag, the softest voice in any room. Every time he lifted that glass, it left a ring. And by the time the cloth came off the painting, the top sheet had gone soft and wavy in 3 places. I could see a date typed in the upper right. 3 days before that dinner. It was not a date they were going to fill in when I made a scene. It was already done, signed and witnessed while I was upstairs in my own house wrapping Warren's birthday gift in tissue paper, and every person eating peach and burrata at that table knew, and not one of them told me. The fourth thing was the empty chair at the head, because that chair belonged to Warren Ashford, and Warren was the only member of that family who ever said my whole name out loud without something else attached to it. They said he was tired. They said the nurses had settled him. A plate had been laid for him anyway, which is a Charleston thing, and it sat there clean and white all through the first course with nobody's fork near it. Now listen carefully, because this is the part one would not believe if somebody told it to me in a hair salon. 40 minutes before my phone started buzzing, Warren Ashford died. 89 years old. In the bed he was born in the north wing of that house, 31 steps and one landing from where his family was eating. He died at 14 minutes past 9, while his grandson was choosing which fork to put down. And in the last clear hour of his life, with 2 nurses in the room and an aide at the door and his own daughter-in-law at the foot of the bed with her hand on the rail, Warren Ashford said one name out loud. It was not his son's. It was not Preston's. It was not the company's, or his late wife's, or God's. I did not know that yet. I sat in a cold chair with a laughing room going quiet around me, and a badge in my bag with my name spelled wrong. And I thought, this is the worst night of my life. It was the first good night I had had in 11 years. I just did not have the information. My name is Marlee Ruth Hale. The Ruth is for my grandmother, and this whole story is hers. I was born in North Charleston on Kentucky Avenue, in a house she bought in 1968 with money saved out of a laundry wage. My father, Elijah Hale, welded 31 years, most of them at the yard. My mother taught 4th grade for 9 years, then she got sick, then she was not there, and my father learned to plait hair badly and did it every morning until I could do it myself. I became a nurse because of the way the hospital treated my mother, and a hospice nurse because of the way it treated her at the end. There is a particular quiet in a room where everybody has stopped pretending, and I found out at 19 that I am good in that quiet. 15 years of palliative care, mostly nights, mostly the last 4 to 14 days of a life. I learned 200 hymns by ear so that when somebody says sing something, I do not have to say, I don't know any. I was not rich, and I never had a day off I did not spend asleep. And I liked the woman I was. I was good at my life. I kept my scrubs. Hold on to that, because it comes back. 6 sets, dark teal, washed and folded flat in the bottom drawer of a dresser in a house on Rutledge Avenue where I was not allowed to hang my own family photographs. Preston asked me twice to get rid of them. The second time he said the drawer could be used, and I said use another drawer. And he looked at me the way a man looks at furniture that has moved on its own. 11 years earlier, they had asked me to step back from the ward, and they used my daughter's name to do it, and I let them. Stepping back meant the foundation Christmas drive and the seating charts for the spring benefit, and knowing which cousins could not sit near which cousins. It meant a diary full of other people's occasions. It meant that when a woman at church asked what I did, I heard myself say, out loud, "Oh, I keep busy." I did not marry a fortune. I did not know what the Ashfords were worth until the 3rd month, and when I found out I was sick in a restaurant bathroom on Broad Street. I married a man who came to the unit at 2 in the morning with a paper bag of shrimp and grits, because I had mentioned once that the night shift makes you dream about food. That happened, and it was real, and I need you to believe it was real, because otherwise I was a fool, and I have decided I was not a fool. I was worked. There is a difference, and you will see the seam. Now, 9 days before that dinner, I had not been up the North Stair in 3 years. There was always a reason. He was resting. He gets agitated with too many faces. Vivian on the phone with that laugh that is really a full stop. Marlee, sugar. He doesn't always know who people are these days. That was a lie, and one of the smaller ones. A girl called Tanisha, 23, 3rd year LPN, met me in the car park with her keys already in her hand, and passed me a note folded into a square the size of a stamp. He keeps asking for you. Nobody will tell you. Tuesday after 4, the front nurse goes to her car for 20 minutes. I sat in my car for 11 minutes with that square in my palm. Then I went up. Warren was propped on 3 pillows with a jug of water sweating on the tray. He had lost so much of himself that his wedding ring had been taped. But his eyes found me, and they were not confused. They were the eyes of a man who had been waiting for a bus a very long time. He said, "There she is. I am a nurse and hands are where I look first. 89 years old, and the second joint of every finger was thickened from work done before that house existed. Whatever the Ashfords are now, that man started somewhere with a wrench in his fist, and the body keeps the receipt. He was lucid for 35 of the 40 minutes. He remembered June had lost a tooth. He asked whether I was still nursing, and when I said no, he shut his eyes for a moment, and I misread it as tiredness. On the table beside him was a brass fitting the size of a lemon, the one that had held down paper on his desk in the study for as long as I had known the house. He had it in his lap under his hand like a man holding a sleeping cat. He turned it over and showed me the base. 2 letters had been scratched into the brass with something sharp. Not stamped. Scratched, badly, at an angle, by somebody in a hurry or somebody angry, and almost polished away by 60 years of a rich man's palm. R.H. I asked whose initials they were, and Warren Ashford looked at me and said, "Ruth's girl." I laughed. "God forgive me." I laughed, gently, and said, "It's Marlee, Mr. Warren." The aide gave me the apologetic wince staff give you when they think the old man is drifting. He said it again anyway, slower, and then shut his mouth and held it shut. And there was something in that face I have seen maybe 5 times in 15 years of this work. It is the face of a person who has decided to say a thing before they die and has just realized they may not be given the time. Then he asked me to open the nightstand drawer and take out the envelope. Cream, bowed from sitting a long time. Nothing written on the front, sealed hard along its whole length with a thumbnail. The way you seal something you do not intend to reopen. His fingers closed round my wrist with more strength than there should have been. "Don't open that in this house." I said, "All right. Don't open it for me. Don't open it when I'm gone and you're feeling sorry. That's not what it's for." I said, "All right, Mr. Warren." And then, the sentence I have repeated so many times since that it has worn smooth like a stone in a pocket. You open it when somebody in this family tries to make you smaller than you are. Not before. You'll know the night. It'll be a nice night. They'll all have their good clothes on. I asked what was in it. Warren Ashford, who had 8 days left of a life that had put his name on a building and a berth in a hospital wing and the side of 9 vessels, looked at the ceiling and said, 51 years of looking for somebody. I took it home and put it in the bottom drawer of the dresser under the folded teal scrubs, and I did not think about it again for 9 days. I am glad I waited, and not because I was clever. I waited because a dying man asked me to, and because he had said one strange thing that I dismissed as confusion. My grandmother's name was Ruth Hale. She pressed shirts and sheets and coveralls at the Navy Yard laundry, back when a workforce that size needed laundry done at an industrial scale, 10 hours at a stretch, in a room where the steam came off the presses so thick the women wore rags round their heads and still went home with their hair flat to their skulls. She died when I was 14. Gap between her front teeth, a laugh you could hear from the corner, never owned a car. She taught me to whipstitch and to whistle. When I was 7, in the front room on Kentucky Avenue, I asked her why she would not ride past the yard on the bus with the window open, and she said, "Because I gave them something, and they gave me $11 and a ham." I thought it was a joke. Children file the strange things adults say under jokes, because the alternative is frightening. $11 and a ham. Hold on to that too. The first time I set foot in Cordelia Hall, I came in through the kitchen with a nursing bag on my shoulder, and nobody in that family knew my name. October 2015. Private referral, north of Broad, palliative, ovarian, 4 to 10 days, and the previous nurse had walked, which is never about the patient. Odette Ashford was 84 and weighed 91 pounds, and had her own opinions about all of it. They put her in the north wing because she asked for it. That room has a window that opens, which matters more than anything else at the end. Everybody thinks a dying person wants quiet and warmth. Most of them want air. Most of them want to hear something that is still happening. She was dark-skinned, and she had spent 6 decades in a family with a very particular history about how dark a person was, and she had never once apologized for the answer. She told me on the first afternoon, with her eyes closed, "They tolerated me for 40 years, and then I outlived the ones who were counting." On the second day, she asked me to sing. I told her the truth, which is that I cannot hold a tune, and she said, "Good. I've had enough beautiful." So I sang. Badly. Blessed assurance in a key I invented as I went. And Odette laughed so hard her oxygen line came loose. And while I was reseating it, she got hold of 2 of my fingers and did not let go for a while. That was the day the man appeared in the doorway, in an overcoat with rain on the shoulders. He did not come in, and he did not speak. He stood there and watched his wife laughing at him for the better part of an hour. And when I finally noticed him properly, he lifted one hand 4 inches and put it down again, which I understood to mean carry on. Later, on the landing, he asked my name. "Marlee Hale," I said. He said, "Hale." Flat. The way you repeat a word you were trying to place. Then he asked where my people came from, and I said North Charleston, Kentucky Avenue, and he said, "The Yard?" I said my father welded there 31 years, and my grandmother was in the laundry before that. He nodded once and went down the stairs without another word, and I thought, that is a rude old man about to lose his wife, and I forgave him. He asked me 2 questions. Both of them were about the same thing, and I had known that family less than 48 hours. Odette died on the Friday at 4:20 with the window open and nobody else in the house. Because Vivian had gone to a hair appointment, she refused to cancel. I opened the window wider, which is a thing my grandmother's people did. I combed her hair, because on the Wednesday she had told me that if 300 people were going to look at her, she wanted her part straight. 3 weeks later, a card came to my flat on Cypress Street with a check for $500 and a printed line thanking me for my professionalism. I sent it back, not to be proud, but because there was no version of $500 that was not an insult to both of us. I wrote 2 lines on the back of the card and posted it and forgot about it. And I did not learn until much later that the person who opened that envelope was not Vivian and was not the estate office. It was Warren. He kept it in a drawer for 11 years. I know, because I have it now. 6 weeks after the funeral, Danita Reeves came onto the ward waving 2 tickets. Charge nurse, for kids, no filter, the sort of woman who tells you your dress is wrong on the way to the wedding. The hospital's development office had a table at the Harbor Gala, and half the doctors had refused to go. Here is a detail I did not think about for 11 years. The tickets were general, 2 seats at a table of 10. But when we got there in December at the Carolina Yacht Club with the boats done up in white lights, there was a place card at my seat. Printed, not handwritten by a volunteer at the door. Printed on the same card as everybody else's, Marlee Hale, and beside it in seat 14A, Preston Ashford. I got 2 days notice for that event. My name went to a printer. Preston in 2015 was 43 and did not look like money, which was the whole trick of him, and I did not see it for a decade. Julian looks like money. Blythe looks like money from 3 streets away. Preston wore a suit that fitted and a watch you had to know about, and he turned his whole body towards you when you spoke, and he asked follow-up questions. He was nervous. That is the part that still gets me. His hand shook slightly, pouring my water. Somebody had put him in that chair with a job to do, and he was frightened of doing it badly. He asked what I did, and then what it was actually like, which is a different question, and almost nobody asks it. He said his grandmother had died in October, and the nurse who sat with her had sent back the family's check, and his mother had been offended for a month. And I said, that was me. And Preston Ashford put down his fork and looked at me like a man watching a coin come down. I thought it was fate. I have looked at that expression again in my memory for 11 years, and it was not wonder. It was relief. A man discovering that the difficult part of his evening had done itself. Then, on the third glass of wine, with the auction running and the room loud, he leaned in and asked something that had nothing to do with anything. "Hail," he said. "Any of your people out at Union Pier?" "The old yard laundry." I said my grandmother, Ruth. 31 years pressing for the Navy Yard. He said, "Huh." That was all. Then he changed the subject to whether I had ever been out to Bull's Island, and I did not think about it again until a lawyer put a piece of paper in front of me 11 years later with a date on it that took the floor out from under my chair. He phoned on the Monday. He came to the unit on the Thursday at 2 in the morning with a paper bag from a place on Spring Street that stays open for cooks and cops. Nobody made him do that. I have pressed on that memory the way you press a bruise, and it still hurts, and it is still real. He sat on a plastic chair in a corridor under lights that make everybody look ill, and he watched me eat and asked about the patient in room 4. For months later, he proposed on a porch at Folly with the tide out and the mud smelling like the inside of an oyster, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. My father did not say congratulations. Elijah Hale sat in his kitchen with his hands flat on the table, before the shaking got noticeable, but after it had started, and pushed his glass away and said, "For months." I said, "When you know, you know." He said, "Baby, rich people don't move fast unless something's on a clock." I told my own father he was being small about it. I stood in the kitchen he raised me in the house his mother bought with laundry money, and told him he was being small, and then I went home and cried in the car about the way his hands had looked on that table. He got there in 9 words because he had worked for those people for 31 years, and he knew what an Ashford looks like when an Ashford wants something. Vivian received me in the garden room on a Sunday in April with sweet tea and lemon shortbread, and her reading glasses on a chain. She was gracious. People imagine a woman shouting. In 11 years, Vivian never raised her voice to me once. She poured my tea. She asked about my mother and said, "Oh, honey," in exactly the right place. Then, 30 minutes in, looking out at the marsh, she said, "You know, my husband's people were in the old fellowship. Burial Society, before the war, right down on Calhoun. Very particular about who came in. There's a story they wouldn't take a man in if he was darker than the door of the meeting house. Can you imagine? Our own people, with a color chart on the door." She laughed and shook her head at the sadness of it, and said, "Thank the Lord we're past all that." And then her eyes went over my face and my hands and my forearms, the whole of me, in about a second and a half, and she said, "You have such a warm complexion, sugar. It photographs beautifully in the summer." I said thank you. It took me 11 years to understand that she had just read me the terms and conditions. Because Vivian Ashford was born on Meeting Street Road in Union Heights, in a house with a tin roof, 4 blocks from the fence line of the yard. Her mother cleaned for a family on Church Street. She married Sterling Ashford in 1979 and spent the next 50 years making certain nobody in Charleston ever put those 2 facts in the same sentence. There is no cruelty like the cruelty of somebody guarding a door they only just got through. 9 days before the wedding, Grady Whitlock walked me through the prenuptial agreement in his office with the ceiling fan and the books nobody has opened since the Ford administration. I was 29, with $4,000 in savings and a car with 180,000 miles on it. I read the first 2 pages properly, and then the sentences got long and I stopped. Grady read the clauses aloud in the tone a man uses for a car park's opening hours. One of them, buried in Section 9. The parties mutually release and forever discharge any and all claims, known or unknown, arising or accruing prior to the date of this marriage, including any claim held by, through or on behalf of any predecessor in interest, ancestor, estate, or heir. I remember hearing the word ancestor and thinking it was strange. For about 2 seconds I thought, that is an odd word for a wedding document. Then Grady turned the page and Preston's thumb moved on my back, and I signed it in blue ink with a pen that had somebody else's initials on the barrel. That clause is not in Blythe's prenuptial agreement. It is not in either of Julian's. I have seen all three now. It was drafted once, for one woman, and the reason it exists is sitting in a brass fitting with 2 letters scratched on the bottom. They also moved the wedding up. We were to marry in October. In June, Vivian rang full of apology about the church, and Preston said the family office had a filing at the end of the 3rd quarter, and it would be simpler for the accountants. And there was a marquee company with a cancellation on the 14th of August. I got married 5 weeks early because of an accountant, and I told my bridesmaids it was romantic how eager he was. At the reception, Vivian gave a 2-minute toast everybody agreed was lovely, and in the middle of it she said, "We are all so pleased that Preston has found someone who needs him." 300 people said ah. June Elizabeth Ashford was born 4 years later, after 2 losses that belonged to me and not to a story. 9 pounds 1 ounce, my hands, his chin. Those first years were good, and I will not lie to you about that, because the lie would make the rest less believable. Preston got up in the night. He learned to do a bottle. He drove home from Jacksonville in a storm because June had a temperature and I sounded frightened on the phone. Warren came to the hospital on the 2nd day, 82, in that same overcoat, and asked to hold her, and Vivian said, "Daddy, your hands." And he said, "My hands are fine." And they were. He held that baby by the window a long time, and then said, to nobody, "Well, now there's 2 of them." 2 of them. Nobody reacted. Everybody smiled at the old man. When June was for the visits started being difficult to arrange. There was always a schedule, always a chest infection going round. He stopped coming to Sunday dinner in 2021. I saw him 3 times in 4 years, always briefly, always with somebody else in the room, and once he looked at me across a lawn and started to stand out of a wicker chair, and Vivian put her hand on his forearm, and he sat back down. They were not protecting a confused old man from a crowd. They were keeping one specific woman out of arm's reach of one specific old man. And they did it for 4 years, so politely that it took me until the night of his death to see the shape of it. Meanwhile, they got me out of the hospital, and Preston did it beautifully. He never told me to quit. He counted. "Do you know how many nights you were on last month? Do you know June asked me where Mummy sleeps? What if the foundation paid you properly to run the drive? Wouldn't that be the same work?" It was never the same work. I resigned on a Tuesday in November. Danita hugged me in the car park and said, "You'll be back," and then held me at arm's length and said, "Marlee, you'll be back, right?" 3 months before that dinner, June's school set a family history project. She did it properly, because she is not a child who does things by halves. Her teacher showed the class how to search the digitized employment records from the old Navy Yard, because half of North Charleston has somebody in those records. June came into the kitchen with the laptop turned round and said, "Mummy, is this my great-great-grandma? Because it says she worked for Daddy's company. Ruth Hale. Laundry, Building 39, 1954 to 1962. And a second line. A transfer, 3 months in 1961, to a department that was not the laundry." I looked at it for 10 seconds, said, "Isn't that something?" and helped her stick it on with the glue stick. On the Saturday, Vivian came for lunch, and June held the project up too close to her face. Vivian said what a treasure it was, and that the photographs deserved better than card and a glue stick, and that she knew a man on King Street who bound things properly in linen. She took it away in the boot of her car. June got it back 11 days later, beautiful, cream linen, her name embossed in gold. The Navy Yard page was still in it. The photographs were all there. The labels in her handwriting had been carefully preserved. The transfer line was gone. I did not notice. My 9-year-old noticed, for months later, in a lawyer's office, sitting on a chair with her feet not touching the floor, and she said it out loud. And that was the moment a room full of adults stopped breathing. Because from the Saturday Vivian carried a child's school project out of my kitchen, everything moved fast. The centenary dinner was announced. A portrait was commissioned. Grady Whitlock opened a file. A complaint form was quietly obtained from the State Board of Nursing. A holding company took another look at a lien on a house on Kentucky Avenue. And in the North Wing, an old man who had been kept behind a schedule for 4 years worked out that his time had got short and reached for an envelope. They were not humiliating me because they had run out of patience with the nurse who married up. They were humiliating me because they were frightened of me, and I did not know why yet. And that is the difference between a sad story and the story I am telling you. Warren had 8 days left, and I spent them buying a dress. Tanisha rang me twice in those 9 days from her car with the engine running. The second time, she said the family had brought in a second agency, and the new staff had been given a visitor's sheet with names on it. I asked, in the stupidest voice, whether I was on it. She went quiet and said, "Not the way you want to be." I drove out there on the Friday and sat in the shell drive of a house I had a key to for 20 minutes, and then turned round and went home. Do you understand what I am saying? A man I loved was dying 30 steps away, and I did not go in because I did not want to be embarrassing. That is what 11 years in that family had made of me. Remember that I drove away, because it makes what happened later mean something. Preston started taking calls in the garage with the door down, sitting in a car with the engine off. There was a new key on his ring, small and brass, the sort that opens a filing drawer, and it was not from our house. Twice in 1 week he asked me in a light voice whether I had been up to see his grandfather, and the second time he asked it while looking at his phone, which is how a man asks a question he has been told to ask. I said no both times, because it was true. If I had said, yes, I do not think I would have got to that dinner at all. Vivian, meanwhile, became warm. In 11 years my mother-in-law had been unfailingly gracious and never once warm. And in the last week of Warren's life, she rang me about curtain fabric, sent June a bracelet, and told me on the telephone that she had always admired how I carried myself. When a woman like Vivian Ashford starts being kind to you, get your papers in order. She collected my daughter 4 hours early on the day of the dinner. She needed a helper for the place cards. June could have supper in the kitchen and stay over, and wouldn't that be easier for me getting ready? She had a bag in the boot already with a nightdress in it I had never seen. I stood in my own driveway and waved at my daughter through the back window of a Mercedes and thought, isn't that nice? They had my child in the house before the first guest arrived. Nobody makes a scene with her daughter asleep upstairs in somebody else's nightdress. There is nothing accidental in this story. Not one thing. I was not in the room for the last hour of Warren's life. Everything I am about to tell you came out later, some of it in sworn statements, some from a girl of 23 who risked her license, and one part from a recording nobody in that family knew existed. At 7:30 that evening, he woke up clear. It happens. Terminal lucidity, the books call it, and it is one of the strangest mercies there is. A man who has not made sense in 4 days will sit up and know your name and be absolutely himself for an hour, and then he will go. He asked what the noise downstairs was. The aide said the family were at dinner, the 100 years dinner, and Warren said, "Tonight?" He asked for his glasses. He asked for the brass fitting, which had been moved to the windowsill during a bed change, and the second nurse put it in his hand. He asked who was in the house, and the aide began listing them. Warren said, "Is she down there?" And the aide, God bless her, said, "Is who down there, Mr. Ashford?" At which point Vivian came in a dinner dress the color of oyster shell, because she checked on him every night at 8, and put her hand on the rail at the foot of the bed. For people in that room, 2 nurses, 1 aide, 1 daughter-in-law, and Warren Ashford, who had 11 minutes left, looked at the woman at the end of his bed and said a name. All 3 parts of it, clearly enough that the girl nearest the door wrote it down 20 minutes later on the back of a shift note, because something about the way the room went made her want a record. Vivian said, "Daddy, you're confused." He said it again. And then he said, verbatim from a statement given under oath by a licensed practical nurse called Tanisha Boyd, "It's in the drawer. It's been in the drawer since Tuesday. You're too late." He died at 14 minutes past 9. Vivian came downstairs, sat in her chair, put her napkin across her lap, and said nothing to anybody for over half an hour. I sat 11 feet from her and ate soup. Preston drove out there. The 12th of the month, humid, one of those Charleston evenings when the sky goes the color of the inside of a shell and the whole city smells green. Rain had come through at 6 and stopped. The tires made that dry crunching on crushed shell that I used to love, and I want to tell you that I do not love it now. About 4 miles out he started. Ma's got the board men coming, so let's keep it light. If Cameron asks about the terminal expansion, just say it's exciting. And don't get onto the foundation thing tonight. The foundation thing was mine. 11 pages. A palliative outreach program for North Charleston, home visits, a bereavement line, for nurses, and a car, funded out of a charitable arm that had spent $140,000 that year sponsoring a regatta. 2 years I had been trying to get 20 minutes in a room about it. I said, Preston, your grandfather is upstairs dying. Palliative outreach is the one thing in that house tonight that's actually about something. He said, that's exactly what I mean. Don't do that tonight. Then he squeezed my knee twice, which was his gesture, and said, you look nice. I said I loved him. He said, I know. I have replayed that so many times it has stopped being reliable, but here is what I believe now. Preston Ashford knew what was in that folder, knew it had been signed on the 9th, knew why the seating had been done without me, and squeezed my knee anyway, and said you look nice, and meant it. A man can be fond of you, and still be the instrument. Cordelia Hall had cars all down the drive, and the live oaks lit from underneath and candles in glass hurricanes along the porch steps. It looked like the best night of a person's life. Vivian met me in the hall with both hands out, and gave me the box in front of 11 people with the coats still coming off. Tissue paper, silver ribbon, and the badge. Somebody said, oh, that's precious. Somebody else said the misspelling was the printer's fault, and they were terrible over there. Vivian put her hand flat on her chest, and said she would have it done again properly, and she said it while holding my eye a beat too long. Then I found my card at the far end, past Blythe's twins, and an empty booster seat, next to a 9-year-old who was not mine because mine was already upstairs in a borrowed night dress. One of the 2 cold chairs. 11 years, and I had always sat 5th from the head, on Preston's side. I looked round for a natural explanation, the way women do. And then I saw Grady in seat 6, which is a family seat, and beside him a woman in her 50s in a gray dress slightly too formal, with a black handbag on her lap instead of under her chair. I was introduced to her as Yvette, a friend of Vivian's from church. I found out on the Thursday that Yvette Ransom has been a commissioned notary public in Charleston County for 19 years. They had a notary at the table. They did not need my signature that night. They needed 22 witnesses to see me be told, and a notary in case grief made me agreeable. Because when you are being watched by 22 people, the fastest way out of the room is a pen. Julian was drinking with intent, and between the soup and the fish he leaned across 2 people and said, quite loudly, Marlee, can I tell you something? Vivian said, Julian. He said, no, it's nice. And he pointed his glass at me and said, you're the only person at this whole table who wasn't picked for a reason. He meant it as a compliment. He meant, you are the only real thing in here. It is the most accurate sentence anybody said to me in 11 years, and it was precisely upside down. Then Vivian stood and said, before dessert, and talked about legacy and what her husband would have wanted, and pulled the cloth. I had sat for that portrait. There is a photograph on my phone of me and Blythe on the lawn that afternoon fanning ourselves with the artist's color cards, and Blythe wrote underneath it, immortal. Nobody looked at me after Preston said it. That was the worst part, and I had not expected it. Not one of those people, except Blythe, who looked straight on with her eyes gone bright, and gave the smallest shake of her head, and I have never been able to decide whether it meant I'm sorry or don't. And then Grady lifted his water glass off the folder and slid it to the woman on his left, and said, would you pass that down to Mrs. Ashford, please? It went down that table hand to hand like a bread basket. 7 people touched it. Somebody's 12-year-old passed it on with two hands. Separation and property settlement agreement. Preston Marcus Ashford and Marlee Ruth Hale Ashford. Executed the 9th day of the month, before a notary, annealed at the bottom of every page in his handwriting, which slopes backwards. And on the 4th page, under a heading about the minor child, the words primary physical custody, and a name that was not mine. I cannot tell you what I felt, so I will tell you what I noticed, because that is what I do when a room gets thin. The folder was warm from all the hands. The notary had not moved. Grady had put his water on the linen, and it was making a ring there instead. My father was 4 miles away in a house his mother bought with laundry money, watching television, with no idea. And all of them, every single one, had their good clothes on. They'll all have their good clothes on. 9 days earlier, an old man had held my wrist and told me I would know the night, and that they would be dressed for it. And I had said all right, Mr. Warren, the way you say all right to a dying man, and put his envelope in a drawer under 6 sets of folded scrubs. I stood up. Everybody flinched. That is the honest truth. 22 people who had sat through it without a word all moved slightly when the woman in the cold chair put her hands on the arms of it, and I understood something in that half second that has never left me. They were not comfortable. They were not powerful. They were frightened of me, and had been for a while, and it had made them do all of this. I did not shout. My grandmother pressed shirts for 31 years for people who would have enjoyed watching me shout. I said, I'd like my coat. And my phone started buzzing against my thigh. I nearly let it go. Sit with that. I nearly let it go. I answered standing up, with a folder in my left hand and 22 people watching, and a woman's voice said, Mrs. Ashford? My name is Miriam Delacroix. I'm very sorry to call you so late, and I'm sorrier to be the one to tell you this over a telephone. She said, Warren Ashford passed at 9:14 this evening. The picture lamps hummed. Somebody's chair creaked. I've represented Mr. Ashford privately for 19 years. He left instructions about the order I make these calls in, and I want you to understand that you are the first call I have made. I said the first. Yes, ma'am. Before his family. That was his instruction, and it's in writing, and I've no intention of apologizing for it. I looked up the length of that table at my husband, who was looking at his own hands, and at his mother, who had come back down at 9:08 with her napkin, and had not said one word about her father-in-law all evening, and who now had her face turned very slightly away from me. Miriam said, in his last hour, Mr. Ashford stated a name in front of 4 people, and one of them wrote it down. It was yours. All 3 parts of it, including the Ruth. She said, I need you in my office on Broad Street on Friday at 10. Bring photographic identification, and bring anything Mr. Ashford gave you directly. I do not want to be more specific on a telephone line. And then, in exactly the tone a woman uses to tell you your car is ready, Miriam Delacroix said, Mrs. Ashford, has anyone at that house asked you to sign anything this evening? Before I could answer, Grady Whitlock's phone went off in his jacket. Then Vivian's, face down beside her dessert spoon, buzzing hard enough to move on the cloth. Then Cameron Doyle's. Then Julian's, playing 4 bars of something with a beat. 22 people in their good clothes, and one by one the phones went round that table like a fire catching in dry grass, and every face turned down towards a screen, and then up towards the empty chair at the head, where a plate had been laid clean and white all evening for a man who was never coming down. Nobody was looking at the painting anymore. Nobody was looking at me either, and for the first time in 11 years that was because they could not afford to. I did not go home that night, because by midnight I did not have one. I drove out past all the other cars with their hazards on and people standing on the Shell Drive with phones to their ears, and Blythe was on the porch steps between 2 hurricane lamps with her arms crossed, watching me go. I got as far as the bend by the water and pulled over, and did the thing you do when the ground has gone, which is look for one solid object. The envelope. 9 days ago. It was in the bottom drawer of the dresser under 6 sets of folded scrubs, and I was 11 minutes away from it. I have never driven like that in my life. The key turned about a third of the way and stopped. Until it happens to you, it is only an inconvenience in a story. It is not the lock, it is the sound. There is a particular dead sound a key makes in a barrel change that afternoon, a little metallic knock with nothing behind it. And I stood on my own porch under my own light with the paint I had chosen out of 9 samples, and knocked that key against the new brass 4 or 5 times, faster each time, like a woman trying to wake somebody up. I went round the side and looked through the kitchen window at my own kitchen. The bowl of lemons, June's reading chart on the refrigerator with the little stickers on it, a glass on the draining board. The guest cottage is at the bottom of the garden, past the fig tree. The light was already on. 11 cardboard boxes in 2 rows on the brick floor, and somebody had put my toothbrush in a sandwich bag. They had packed my life while I ate crab soup. The dinner started at 7:30. The locksmith invoice, which I have seen since, is timed 6:12 that evening. 2 women from a service in Mount Pleasant were paid for 4 hours work that day. While Vivian was pulling a cloth off a painting, 2 strangers were in my bedroom deciding which of my shoes were worth a box. I went through all 11 on my knees in a navy dress with my hands shaking so hard I tore the tape instead of lifting it. Box 7 had the scrubs, all 6 sets, still smelling of the fabric softener I have used since I was 22, laid in neatly by somebody who had taken care over it. There was no envelope. I went through them twice more, taking everything out until that room looked like the inside of a burst bag, and at 2:30 in the morning I sat down with my back against the wall and made a sound I have only ever heard other people make, in rooms where somebody has just died. I had left it in a house I could no longer get into, and the only 2 people who knew it existed were me and a dead man. I slept on a bare mattress with my coat over me and my car keys in my hand. At 8:20, Blythe rang. She did not say good morning. She said, "Don't come to the house." I said, "Where is my daughter?" "She's here. She's fine. She had pancakes." Then, quieter, further from the phone, "Marlee, Ma's got her at the big house. She told June there was a burst pipe at yours." I asked to speak to her, and Blythe said not yet, and I said now. And there was a long pause with a hand over the phone. 11 minutes. I timed it afterwards from my call log, because I needed to know exactly how long I had been allowed. She told me about the pancakes. She told me Granddaddy Warren had gone to heaven and Grandma Vivian said he was not in pain, and asked whether she would still be allowed to go to Chloe's on Saturday. She said, "Is our house very wet?" I said, "A little bit wet." And then my 9-year-old went quiet for a second and said, "Mummy, are you still my mum when you're not here?" I said yes about 4 times. "Yes, baby. Always, when you're asleep and when I'm asleep and when I'm at the shop, all the time." She said okay. Then she said, "Grandma says say goodbye now." I sat with the phone against my ear listening to a dead line and understood, with a clarity I had not had at any point during that dinner, that these people were going to take my child. Not out of malice. Vivian Ashford does not hate me and never did. I was a liability with a face on it, and my daughter was the part of the arrangement that had gone right. And if the arrangement had to be closed out, then June stayed, and I did not. The letter from the state board came on the Wednesday, to my father's house, because that is the address on my license. He put it on the kitchen table unopened and rang me and said, in a voice I had not heard since my mother, "Baby, there's something here from Columbia. Notice of complaint." An anonymous complainant alleged that on the 9th day of the month, at a private residence in Charleston County, a registered nurse named Marlee Ruth Hale Ashford, not employed by the facility and not on the care team of record, had been present unsupervised with a terminally ill patient of 89, had adjusted an analgesia pump without authorization, had made no entry in any record, and that the patient's death had followed. There was a line about potential referral to the county coroner. The 9th, the day I went up that stair on a note folded into a square. The day Warren put an envelope in my hand. It is also the day, to an hour I have never established, that a separation agreement was signed and notarized in Grady Whitlock's office. They built both files on the same day, side by side, by the same man, and the second one only makes sense if somebody knew I had been up that stair. And here is what took the wind out of me at my father's table, with his shaking hand flat on the oilcloth next to mine. It was true. I did go up without being on the team. I did check that pump, because his rate was set for a man 20 pounds heavier, and he was gripping the sheet with his left hand, which is the thing I look for. I adjusted a bolus he asked me for. I did not chart it, because I was not staff and I had come up a back stair on a note. Every fact in that complaint was correct, arranged in that order, with the conclusion left hanging where a reader's mind would go. 15 years, and I have never harmed a patient, and I had never before been made to see how thin the wall is between the best thing you do and the worst thing you can be accused of. Danita met me in the car park behind the hospital on her break, still in scrubs with her badge turned round. She let me finish and then said, "Sit down in the car with me. Marlee, somebody called the ward about you." Beginning of June. A woman rang the unit clerk claiming to be from a credentialing company doing a background check for a foundation board appointment, and wanted my dates of employment, my last supervisor, and whether there had ever been an incident report with my name on it. Nobody had put me forward for any board. There was no appointment. I have checked. Somebody was building a file on my nursing history in the first week of June. June is the month my 9-year-old turned a laptop round in my kitchen. Danita watched me work that out, and then said the thing friends say and family cannot. You need a lawyer that isn't theirs, and you need one today, and I don't want you at that funeral. I went. Zion Chapel AME on Cannon Street, 1,100 people, 300 inside, and the rest on the pavement in the heat with the doors open and a speaker on a stand. I went because that man asked for me by name in the last hour of his life, and because I have sat with more dying people than anybody in that building, and I know what a body is owed. Row 9. Rows 1 to 4 were family, 5 was the board, 6 through 8 were company officers, and the old guard from the yard. My daughter was in row 2 in a navy dress I had never seen, between her grandmother and her father, feet not quite reaching the floor, and she turned round twice looking for me, and Vivian put a hand on her knee. The program listed the family, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren by name, including June. My name was not in it anywhere, and neither was the fact that a woman in row 9 had washed Odette Ashford's feet and combed her hair and opened her window at 20 past 4 on a Friday in October 2015. Vivian's eulogy was superb. 11 minutes, no notes. One very good story about Warren and a hurricane and a dog, and she cried in the right place and did not smear an eyelash. Preston read the 23rd Psalm and his voice went at the 4th verse, and 1,100 people made a sound of sympathy, and I sat in row 9 and watched my husband be comforted by an entire city. Afterwards, in that press of dark clothes on the pavement, an old man came sideways through the crowd. 91 at least, gray suit that had fitted him in 1978, deacon's pin, a cane he was not really using, and a flat hand that took mine with a grip like a wrench. He looked at my face a long moment and said, "You're Ruth's grandbaby." I said, "Yes, sir." I asked how he knew me. "Girl, you got her jaw." And he laughed, and then he stopped laughing. His name was Roosevelt Pinckney, and everybody called him Rooster, and he had come up in Building 39 with my grandmother when they were both younger than my daughter's teacher. He leaned in, breath of peppermint and old coffee, and said, "They still got that thing of hers on a desk in there, don't they? Brass. Sat on that man's desk 40 years. I could not speak. Ask them about 61, baby. Ask them what they paid her." His mouth went tight, and he shook his head twice. $11. A young man appeared at his elbow with a bottle of water and said the car was wanting him. And as he was turned round, Rooster Pinckney said one more thing over his shoulder that I did not understand for another 11 days. Warren tried, you know. Warren tried. 40 minutes later, in the car park of the Piggly Wiggly on Meeting Street Road, Ophelia Beckett rang me from a number I did not have saved. Miss Ophelia has cleaned Cordelia Hall for 22 years. 68. Keys on a wrist coil. And in 11 years, she has never called me anything but Miss Marlee and never once offered an opinion about that family. She was 4 spaces from me in a Buick with the air conditioning on, still in her funeral clothes. She did not get out and did not want me to get in. She wound the window down, handed me a carrier bag with something flat in the bottom, and said, "They had 2 ladies in there Tuesday that don't know how to pack a house." The packers had put loose paper into a bin liner. She had gone through that bin liner on the Wednesday morning the way she has gone through every bin liner leaving that house for 22 years, because in her experience the things people throw away are the things they later scream about. She said, "I know Mr. Warren's hand when I see it." Inside, between 2 sheets of kitchen towel, was a cream business envelope, bowed, sealed along its whole length, nothing written on the front. I said her name and could not get any further. Ophelia Beckett looked straight ahead at the trolley bay and said, "I've been in that house since before you. I seen how they do. And then, don't you sit in this car park with that. Go on somewhere." I sat in my father's driveway with it on the steering wheel for the better part of an hour, and I did not open it. An old man with taped-up rings had said, "Don't open it when you're feeling sorry." And the truth was that by that Saturday, I was not being made small anymore. I was past that. I was on fire. So I put it in the glove box and went inside, and the second letter was waiting. 30 days. The house my grandmother bought in 1968 out of a laundry wage, for rooms and a porch and a fig tree she planted the year my father started school. A home equity line drawn in 2019 for his roof and his first 8 months of neurologist appointments, which I had guaranteed, arranged at the time by a man in Preston's family office as a favor. I had never once looked at who held it. Palmetto Reach Holdings, LLC. A single-member entity. The member is a trust, and the trustee of that trust, according to a filing that took Miriam Delacroix 9 minutes to pull, is Ashford Family Interests. They had bought my grandmother's house out from under me in 2019 and let me go on paying them for 6 years, and I had thanked them for the favor at Christmas. My father read that letter twice with his left hand under the table where he thought I could not see it, and when he finished he said, "Well, that was all." Then he got up and put the kettle on and stood at his own sink with his back to me and his shoulders down. I have been angry a great many times. That is the only occasion I have ever wanted to burn something down. Miriam Delacroix's office is above a stationer's on Broad Street, 1 flight up, with a ceiling fan and a window unit fighting each other and a brown sofa that has been there since Reagan. 63, short, wide, reading glasses pushed up into gray natural hair, and a way of listening with her chin down that makes you tell the truth. 19 years as Warren's private counsel, which she distinguished from company counsel, saying the word private the way you set something heavy on a table. For things on that desk. A condolence card from November 2015, gold edge, check stubs still stapled inside. 2 lines on the back in my own handwriting from when I was 29. I sat with her 4 days. "Please give it to the nurses' fund instead," Miriam said. He kept that in his desk for 11 years. It's Exhibit A on my inventory. A photograph. 19 years old, outside a chain-link gate, headscarf, work dress, that laugh, that gap in her teeth. My grandmother at an age I have never seen her. A personnel record. Ruth Ellen Hale, laundry press operator, September 1954 to March 1962, and a transfer line, 3 months in 1961, to gasket and seal reclamation, fitting shop, temporary detail. The same line that came off my daughter's project on its way to a bookbinder on King Street. And a receipt. Carbon flimsy gone the color of weak tea, dated the 3rd of November, 1961. Received of Ashford Marine Works the sum of $11 in full and final settlement of any and all claim, together with 1 ham. And at the bottom, where a signature ought to be, a thumbprint in blue ink, pressed twice because the first one smudged. My grandmother could read and write. She read to me. She did the crossword in ink. There was no earthly reason for a thumbprint except that somebody put a pad in front of her in a room and did not give her time. I said, "What did they buy for $11? And Miriam took off her glasses and said, "Before I answer, I need you to look at one more thing, and I'm going to apologize in advance, because I have had it for 19 years and I have not been permitted to speak." 6 pages, no letterhead. Confidential engagement summary, prepared for G. Whitlock, ESQ subject line. Hale lineage, living descendants, Charleston County. Page 2 had my father, his address, his employer, his pension, his diagnosis, which he received 4 months before I knew about it. Page 3 had me, my license number, my shift pattern, 4 nights out of 7, Sunday to Wednesday, my flat on Cypress Street, and my landlord's name, my church, my car, a note that I was unmarried, a line reading, subject attends hospital-affiliated charitable functions when accompanied by colleague D. Reeves, and in the top right corner, typed, the date it was prepared, the 11th of November 2015. 3 weeks and 3 days before a place card with my name printed on it was set down in seat 14B, next to 14A, at a table where a nervous man turned his whole body towards me and asked what nursing was actually like. Grady Whitlock asked me to lunch. Not a letter, not a process server. A phone call at 9:10 on the Monday. That soft voice, "Sorry to trouble you. Half an hour at the club." I said the Carolina Yacht Club. He said, "Unless you'd rather somewhere else." 11 years, and that man had never suggested anywhere else in his life. He picked the room where my name had been printed on a card in December 2015, because it is a small cruelty, and small cruelties are what he does instead of hobbies. Miriam told me to go. Take nothing, sign nothing, and let him talk. A man like that will tell you his whole hand if you let him be generous. He had a table by the window with the light off the water coming up onto the ceiling. He stood, pulled my chair out, ordered crab cakes for both of us without asking, and cleaned his glasses on his napkin, which is what he does when he is about to be sincere. "Marlee, may I call you Marlee? I want to say first that what happened at that table was not my doing, and I thought it was low. I believe he meant it. That is what makes him what he is." Grady Whitlock has a functioning conscience which he keeps in a separate account. Then he laid it out, in order, without a note. $4.5 million, structured over 3 years for tax reasons. First payment, inside 14 days. The note on Kentucky Avenue extinguished, not refinanced, and the deed transferred outright to my father, clear. The board complaint withdrawn in writing by the complainant, stating the allegation was made in error, filed in the case record so it would never appear on a license verification in any state for the rest of my working life. Custody 50-50, Preston's initials already on that page. 2 years of private school fees for June, paid in advance. And $200,000 described as a discretionary bereavement acknowledgement, in recognition of my care of Odette Ashford. He let it sit. Then, in exchange, full mutual release, an NDA covering the marriage, the family, the dinner, and the estate. And one further clause, which he read from a single sheet in the voice he uses for a car park's opening hours. A full renunciation and quitclaim by me and by my father Elijah Hale as the only other living issue in the line of any and all claim of the estate of Ruth Ellen Hale against Ashford Marine Works, Ashford Maritime Group, and any successor entity arising out of any invention, improvement, design, drawing, or process, howsoever the same may have arisen. Signed and executed before the reading of the will on Friday morning. He put the sheet face down on the tablecloth. I said, "Grady, what did my grandmother invent?" And he did not pretend not to know. He put his glasses back on, looked out at the water, and said, "That is precisely the question that $4.5 million is intended to prevent you from asking in a courtroom." Then he leaned forward and said the most honest sentence anybody in that family ever said to me. "Marlee, I am 58 years old, and I have worked for these people since I was 26. Take it. I would take it. You will not get a better number and you will never get a cleaner exit. And if you go to that reading on Friday without signing this, that complaint goes to the coroner's office on Monday, and there is a version of the next 18 months of your life in which you are a woman in the newspaper who put a rich old man to sleep. He said, I have 4 days of goodwill in me. After Friday, I am simply a lawyer. I went from that club to Kentucky Avenue and sat on the top step at my father's feet the way I did when I was 6 and said, Daddy, tell me about 1961. He did not ask why. He looked at his hands a while. Then he said, You want the whole thing or you want the part one can stand? I said the whole thing. He was 11 years old in 1961, and he remembers the summer because his mother came home 3 nights in a row and did not eat. That yard wash for a workforce you could put a small city inside. Sheets, coveralls, uniforms, and industrial rags by the ton, coming back from the fitting shops soaked in oil and grease, and the women in that laundry handled every one of them. And through the spring of 1961 the fitting shop was in trouble. Seal and gasket work on submarine systems, and something was failing. The men called it the Monday fault because it always showed up on the test bench after a weekend. They stripped it and rebuilt it and stripped it again. A man came down from a company in Ohio. 8 months in and out of the shop, with money on it and Navy time on it, and people getting shouted at in glass offices. And my grandmother knew what it was in about 4 days, because it came through her hands. The reclaimed seal stock came back to the laundry in the rag bins to be degreased, and she was the one who spread them out on the table. She told my grandfather over supper that the burning was not in the middle. It was in a ring near the edge, always on one side, always the same distance in, and the ones from the outboard side burned, and the ones from the inboard side did not. Nobody in that fitting shop was looking at the gasket after it failed. They were looking at the machine. She was looking at 400 failed gaskets a week laid flat on a table under a good light, and she was the only person in the entire yard doing so. She worked out that the seat was being clamped uneven because of the way the flange had been faced, and that the profile of the seal was wrong for it. And she drew a different one. She drew it on the back of a laundry ticket at this table. This table, 4 feet from where I was sitting. She did not know the word for it. She called it a lip. She drew a shape with an angle on the inside face and a step on the outside, and she took it to a leading man in the fitting shop named Marion Bell, who was black and one of only 3 in that shop with a rating, and Marion Bell took it to his foreman. They cut 2 out of sheet stock by hand and put them on the bench. The Monday fault went away, and in September 1961, Ruth Ellen Hale, laundry press operator, was given a temporary detail so that she could stand at a bench with 3 engineers and answer questions about a thing she had drawn on the back of a laundry ticket. 3 months. My father said, she was so proud. Baby, you never seen anything like it. She had a new pair of shoes for that job. In November, the detail ended. She went back to the presses, and a man from the company office came down to building 39 with a carbon flimsy and a pad of blue ink and $11 in an envelope, and told her the drawing had been done on company time with company materials and belonged to the works, and that this was a courtesy, and that there was a ham for her at the gate. She pressed her thumb on it twice, because the first one smudged. I asked why she signed. My father looked at me a long moment with his jaw doing the thing my jaw does, and said, she had a boy of 11 and a husband with 1 lung, and it was 1961, in South Carolina, at a Navy yard, and a white man's word and a brown man's word both went further than hers. Then he said, and she didn't sign it. She put her thumb on it. There's a difference, and she knew it. She used to say that. She never spoke of it again after about 1963. The only sign was that she would not ride the bus past the yard with the window open, and that once, when he was grown, he came in and found her at the kitchen table with a pencil, drawing that shape on the back of an envelope over and over, the way you doodle. And she saw him watching and screwed it up, and said, fix my collar for me. I asked whether he had ever tried. In 1994, I went to a lawyer on King Street. He kept me 2 hours and charged me $140 and told me I'd need the original drawing. And the original drawing was in their building. And no judge in this state was going to open a 1961 file for a welder. He said, so I welded. 31 years. For them. He walked past a building with his mother's shape in every seal in it, and came home and taught me to plait my own hair. I told him about the offer. All of it, including the clause with his name in it. He sat back and shut his eyes, and the fan turned, and a dog barked 2 streets over. And after about a minute my father said, take it. I said, Daddy. Marlee, take the money. I said no. And he opened his eyes with tears standing in them, and said the hardest thing anybody said to me in the whole of it. Harder than the dinner, harder than the locks. I'm 69 years old. My hand shakes so bad I can't sign my own name twice the same. I got maybe 4 good years, and then I got the other kind. And I want to die in my mother's house, in her room, with her fig tree outside that window. That's all I want. And you can buy that for me by Friday with a pen. He said, don't you make me a monument, baby. I'm tired. Sit in that with me, because everybody hearing this from the outside knows what the protagonist should do. And I am telling you that on the Monday evening of that week, I very nearly signed. I sat up all night, drawing 2 columns on the back of a delivery note like a lunatic. On one side my license, my father's room, 50-50 custody in writing, and $4.5 million. On the other, a shape drawn on the back of a laundry ticket, and $11, and a ham, and a dead woman who could not be brought back by any amount of it. At about 4 in the morning I got as far as looking up how you get a document notarized on short notice in Charleston County. At 9:30 Blythe knocked on the cottage door with a Yeti cup, looking like she had not slept either, and did not come in past the frame. I'm not here. If Ma asks, I'm at Pilates. Then, are you going to sign Grady's thing? I said I did not know. I need to tell you a thing, and then I need to leave. And I'm going to deny it if you say it in a room with me in it. I did the seating for the Harbor Gala in 2015. I was the junior on the committee. Ma gave me a slip of paper with 3 names on it, and told me where to put them. 2 were donors she was cross with. The 3rd one was you. 14B. She'd written it out. Marlee Hale, 14B, next to Preston. I said, Blythe, we hadn't met. Your grandmother had been dead about 6 weeks. And Blythe Ashford Kane, 38 years old, in gym clothes, said, I know. I've known since Tuesday what that means, and I have not been able to eat. I filed the diagram. It's in the box files in the estate office with the 2015 benefit paperwork, in her handwriting, with the printer's proof stapled to it. Then she said, there's something else and I don't understand it. Granddaddy came in while I was doing the cards. He never came into that stuff. He read the diagram over my shoulder and asked who was in 14B, and I told him, and he stood there and said, oh, and then he went out on the porch and stood in the rain. I was 27. I thought he was going senile. Warren Ashford had known who I was in December 2015, 3 weeks before his grandson bought me a paper bag of shrimp and grits at 2 in the morning. He had watched them do it, and said nothing, and let it go on for 11 years. Warren tried, you know. Warren tried. I took the envelope out of the glove box on the Tuesday evening. Not at Kentucky Avenue, because my father was in that house. Not in the cottage, because it belonged to them. I drove to the end of the pier at the old yard, where the water comes up green against the pilings, and you can see the container cranes on one side, and the marsh going flat and gray away on the other. 8:30. There was a boy fishing 40 yards down with a bucket and a radio. Building 39 is still there with a different company's name on the side and half the windows boarded. I sat on the bonnet facing it and opened the envelope with my thumbnail. 3 things. The photograph, the original, scalloped white border, a crease across one corner. On the back in pencil, Ruthie, Gate 3, 1954. A laundry ticket, 4 inches by 6, printed with columns for date and building and count, dated in ink April 12, 61, soft as cloth at the folds. And on the back, in pencil, in a hand never taught to draw, a cross-section. An outer step, an inner face at an angle, a radius at the heel. Beside it, in printed capitals, this side outboard. And under that, 3 words. Not the Mackin. 65 years, and the pencil still black on it. And a single sheet of the heavy cream paper Warren used for everything, folded once, in fountain pen, the hand shaky in places and firm in others the way an old man's is on a day when it comes and goes. Marlee. My father took this from Ruth Hale in 1961, and I helped him do it. I was 24 years old, and I carried the money down to that building in an envelope in my own hand, and I put a ham in the boot of the car, and I have thought about her face every week of my life since. I looked for her for 51 years. I looked in the wrong places for 40 of them, because I was looking for a woman with a patent and a lawyer, and Ruth Hale went back to the presses and never told a living soul. Then you walked into my wife's room and sang to her out of tune, and she laughed, and you had Ruth's jaw. I have not had the courage to do this while I could be made to answer for it, and that is my shame and not yours. What I have had is time and paper and a room they thought I was asleep in. The ticket is the whole thing. It is the original, and it is dated, and it will match the drawing they filed in March 1962. Which is number 3,047,116 in my father's name. Do not take their money. They will offer it, and it will be a great deal, and you will be sitting with your daddy when you decide, and you must not take it. What they are buying is not your silence. It is your grandmother's name on a piece of paper, and once you sell that it is gone for good, and there is no court on this earth that will give it back to her. Miriam has the rest. Be at her office on Friday, and do not go into that room angry, because they will read anger as grief, and grief is easy to beat. One more thing. My dining room has heard everything said in it for 11 years, and there is not a soul in this family who knows it, because I got tired of asking people to repeat themselves. Ask Miriam for the 12th. W.A. The boy down the pier caught something and shouted about it to nobody, and the light on the water had gone that hard orange it goes. The 12th was the dinner. Miriam had 2 days to do what should have taken 2 months. She did it with one paralegal and a woman she called in from Colombia who had done nothing but patent litigation for 26 years and who arrived on the Thursday in a linen suit with a rolling case and said almost nothing to me for 4 hours. Ada Sowell sat with the ticket in a clear sleeve under a desk lamp and a printout of patent 3,047,116 beside it, and went back and forth between them with a ruler and a pencil for a very long time. At about 11 she said, without looking up, "Mrs. Ashford, do you understand what you have here? A patent drawing is a legal document. It has a hand in it. In 1962 a draftsman copied a shape off something in front of him, and he did it faithfully, which is what a good draftsman does. And he copied the mistake." She turned the printout round and put her pencil on it. There is a radius at the heel dimensioned to 3/32. There is no engineering reason on God's earth for 3/32. It is not a standard tool radius. It is not a stock size. It is not a decision anybody with training would make. It is what you get when a woman with no drawing instruments puts her thumbnail down to round a corner and somebody else measures it afterwards. She said, "The filed drawing has your grandmother's thumbnail in it." Miriam took her glasses off and sat down, and neither of them said anything for half a minute. Then Ada said, "The patent expired in 1979 and no court is going to award you royalties on submarine seals from the Eisenhower administration. Get that out of your head. This is inventorship. That is a different animal, and it does not expire, and it does not care how long you took. The correction of an inventor's name is a matter of record for as long as the record exists, and I have never once in 26 years seen a case with a dated original drawing in the actual inventor's hand and a signed statement from a witness to the taking." I said, "There isn't a witness. They're all dead." And Miriam said, "Marlee, sit down," and went into the safe. A sworn affidavit, 5 pages, executed and notarized on the 6th of April 2007, signed Warren Sterling Ashford, in which a man of 70 told the whole thing in the first person. His father's instruction, the $11, the ham, the envelope he carried down himself, and the fact that Ruth Hale had said, when he put it on the table, "Yes, sir," and gone back to her press, and had not looked at him. He signed it and instructed his lawyer to hold it, undelivered, unfiled, until his death. 19 years. Miriam said, "I begged that man. In 2009, I told him he could do it in 90 days and be alive to see it. And he said, and I have never forgotten it, Miriam, if I do this while I'm breathing, they'll have me declared, and my daughter-in-law will spend $400,000 proving I'm soft in the head. And the last thing the record will say about Ruth Hale is that a confused old man made her up." She said, he wasn't wrong. That's the worst of it. There was a second document from 2006. A restitution instrument, drawn by Miriam, signed by Warren as an individual and as chairman, providing for the correction of inventorship, a public statement of record, and a trust for the heirs of Ruth Ellen Hale funded by a fixed percentage of the group's net asset value. Executed, both signatures, 2 witnesses. And in the margin of page 3, in a small neat hand, I had washed initial the bottom of a separation agreement, the initials GW, and a query. Confirm heirs identified? See engagement summary. Miriam said, that instrument required a corporate filing to be effective. It went to the estate office in October 2006 for counter-execution, and it never came back. I was told the chairman had reconsidered. I asked the chairman. He said he had not. I put that in a letter. I have the letter. She said, 9 years later, a woman with the surname Hale was seated in 14B. In 2006, Warren Ashford tried to give it back and signed his name to it. Grady stopped it in the estate office and wrote a note asking whether the heirs had been identified. For 9 years, nothing, because there was nothing to find. My father was welding. I was on a ward. My grandmother was in the ground with a stone that says wife mother in letters an inch high. Then an agency sent a hospice nurse to the north wing for 4 days, and Warren stood on a landing with rain on his shoulders and asked 2 questions, and both were about the same thing. And when his own lawyer of 19 years came to that house in November to talk about the estate, he said a name out loud in the wrong room. On the 11th of November 2015, Grady Whitlock commissioned 6 pages on the living descendants of Ruth Hale, and it came back with a shift pattern and a landlord. 3 weeks later, my name was on a printed place card in Vivian Ashford's handwriting. They did not find a claimant and buy her off. That would have been a scandal with a paper trail. They found a claimant who was 32, unmarried, on 4 nights out of 7, with a father with a diagnosis and a roof that needed doing. And they married her into the family, and 9 days before the wedding, a man with a beautiful gray beard read her a clause in a bored voice about ancestors and heirs. 11 years of Sunday dinners was a containment structure. The seating chart, the 4-month courtship, the accountant's filing date that moved my wedding forward 5 weeks. The reason my father was never once invited to Cordelia Hall, the schedule on the North Stair, the shrimp and grits. I put my head down on Miriam Delacroix's desk that afternoon and cried in a way I have only done twice in my life. And that good woman put her hand flat on my back and did not tell me it was going to be all right. And then I sat up and asked her for the 12th. She said, I don't know what that is. I showed her the letter. She read it twice, went very still, and said, the dining room. Warren had a hearing device fitted in 2014 that paired to a tablet and recorded, so that he could play conversations back at volume, because he had got tired of asking people to repeat themselves and tireder of being told it did not matter. At some point it stopped being about hearing. In the last 2 years he had twice asked her whether a recording made in a man's own house in a one-party consent state was admissible. I told him yes. South Carolina is one party. I told him it was legal, and I told him it was ugly, and I asked him what on earth he wanted it for. She said, he told me he wanted to hear how they talked about me when I'd gone up to bed. Miriam and Ada and a technician sat in that office until 4 in the morning going through 11 hours of audio from a device that had been in a drawer in a dead man's room, with 40% of its battery left. She sent me home. Do not listen to this tonight. You have to be in a room with those people in 6 hours, and if you hear it now, you will not be able to keep your face. She rang me at 20 past 4. Marlee, where's something you can sit still in? Friday, 10 o'clock, Broad Street. They had to bring in chairs. 14 of us with the window unit laboring, and after everything I have told you about seating, you have earned this. Vivian in the middle of the front row in navy, ankles crossed, handbag on her lap. Preston beside her, shaved badly on one side of his jaw. Blythe on his other side, not looking at her mother. Julian at the end, sober, which was so unusual that Blythe kept checking on him. Grady with 2 banker's boxes and a legal pad and no glasses on. Cameron Doyle and a woman from the company secretary's office. Ada against the wall with her rolling case. Tanisha Boyd on a chair in the corridor, in uniform, having come off nights and refused to go home. Me at the end of the front row nearest the window. And June. I did not bring her, and it was thrown at me later. Preston brought her because Vivian told him to, and Vivian told him to because she believed I would not fight in front of my own child. She sat her at the little table in reception with a coloring set and said to me, quite kindly, I thought you'd want to see her, sugar. My daughter ran the length of that room and hit me in the middle like a car and said, into my dress, is our house still wet? I sat her on my knee. Miriam came out at 4 minutes past 10 with a file box. Before I read, 2 matters of order. First, I am counsel to the estate, and I have been Mr. Ashford's private counsel for 19 years. Mr. Whitlock is counsel to the company and to the family. Those are not the same thing, and this morning they are going to be quite noticeably different things. Grady said, Miriam. Second, the will was executed in March 2007, and there are 3 codicils, the most recent dated the 29th of April this year, witnessed by 2 independent physicians, and I will circulate their capacity assessments now so that nobody has to waste the morning building up to it. She handed the stapled document to Grady personally. He read the first page, and I watched his shoulders go down half an inch and stay there. The will took 40 minutes, and most of it was ordinary. Ophelia Beckett, 22 years, $100,000, and the contents of the kitchen. $50,000 to a deacon named Roosevelt Pinckney of Zion Chapel AME, who was in building 39 and remembers. The car to Julian, with a line about not selling it inside a year, which made Julian laugh once, wetly. The house to Vivian for her lifetime. And then Miriam turned a page and said, Article 11. I am going to read this exactly as drafted, and I would ask that nobody interrupt me, because I will simply start the paragraph again. My holding of Class A voting shares in Ashford Maritime Group, amounting on the date of this codicil to 31.4% of the voting capital, together with my personal papers, my father's papers, and the brass valve body which stands upon my desk, I give not to my family, but to a trust which I have established in my lifetime. The trust is named the Ruth Ellen Hale Trust. I appoint as sole trustee, with full voting discretion and without requirement to consult, Marlee Ruth Hale, whom this family has known for 11 years as a guest in it. I felt my daughter's weight on my knee and heard the window unit. Vivian said, That's not possible. Miriam kept reading. If the said Marlee Ruth Hale shall have executed, at any time before the reading of this will, any release, quitclaim, renunciation, or settlement in respect of the estate of Ruth Ellen Hale, or in respect of United States Patent 3,047,116, whether for consideration or otherwise, then this article shall be void, and my Class A shares shall pass instead to the Charleston County Public Library Foundation, and my executor shall publish the reason. Grady put both hands flat on his legal pad and looked at the floor. $4.5 million. Signed before the reading on Friday. He had not been buying my silence. He had been trying to burn Article 11. And if I had gone into a notary's office on the Wednesday like a sensible, frightened woman with a father who wanted to die in his mother's room, he would have done it with my own hand and my own pen, and I would never have known what I had thrown away. Vivian turned round in her chair and said, to Grady, not to me, "You told me it was handled." And Miriam said, "There is more of Article 11. I have watched this family for 11 years, and I have not intervened, and I will answer to God for that, and not to any of you. I have left instructions that on the reading of this will there be produced the audio record of the dinner held in my dining room on the 12th day of this month, which record exists because I am old and deaf and got tired of being told that what I heard did not matter. Let it be played before the shares are transferred, and let my family sit and listen to themselves in the presence of the woman they were talking about." Cameron Doyle said, "Absolutely not," and stood up. Miriam Delacroix, 63 years old, said, "Mr. Doyle, sit down or leave, but you are not going to talk over a dead man in my office." Then she looked at me and said, "Mrs. Ashford, there is a child in the room." Blythe stood before I could speak, crouched down in front of my daughter, and said, "Junebug, will you come and color with me in the little room and let the grown-ups be boring?" June looked at me. I nodded. And as Blythe lifted her off my knee, my daughter stopped and turned and looked at the table where Miriam had set out the exhibits under the desk lamp and pointed with one finger at the clear sleeve with a laundry ticket in it and the personnel record beside it. And she said, in a perfectly ordinary voice, "That's the page from my project." Nobody moved. "It's got the extra line on it. Mummy, it's got the extra line on it. The one that got lost at the Bookman." 9 years old, hand in her aunt's hand. And in a room with 14 adults in it, 4 of them lawyers, my daughter looked up at her grandmother in navy with the handbag on her lap and said, "Grandma, you said the Bookman lost it." Vivian said, "Sweetheart, Grandma doesn't know anything about that." And my daughter said, "You do, though. You took it in your car." Blythe got her out of that room. She did it well, and she did it fast, and she was crying before the door shut. Miriam let the silence sit 5 seconds. "Let the record note that the minor child made that statement unprompted, and that I will be taking a note of it in the presence of 2 witnesses, and I would advise Mrs. Ashford Sr. not to say another word to me this morning without her own counsel, by which I mean her own, and not Mr. Whitlock, whose position has just become difficult." Grady did not look up. I want to tell you what he did instead, because I have thought about it more than I expected to. He took the cap off his pen, wrote 3 or 4 lines on his pad, tore the sheet off, folded it in half, and put it in his inside pocket. 32 years in that family service, and in that moment the man was documenting his own position. Miriam played 4 selections. The first, just after 7. Glass on wood. A vacuum somewhere. Vivian and a woman from the caterers discussing whether the peonies were too tall, and then Vivian saying, "And you've got 14 at the top and 8 at the bottom. Mrs. Ashford is at the bottom, by the window." The caterer, confused, "You're Mrs. Ashford." And Vivian, pleasantly, "The other one." The second, 40 seconds. Grady asking where he should sit. Vivian, "By me. Bring the folder. Don't put it out until after the painting." Grady saying he had said what he thought about the painting. Then, if she stands up and walks out before the folder's on the table, we've got nothing. We've got a scene and no notary. Vivian, "She won't walk out." Grady, "You're very sure?" And Vivian Ashford said, "Grady, that girl has sat in the cold chair for 11 years and thanked me for it. She won't walk out." I heard a woman say that about me, and my hands were completely steady, and I will tell you why. Because she was right. Every word of it was true on the 12th of the month, and it had stopped being true somewhere between a locksmith's invoice and a laundry ticket on the bonnet of a car at the end of a pier, and now she was going to find out on the record. The third was the dinner, played long. The tissue paper and 11 people making a noise and my own voice saying thank you. And there is nothing I can tell you about hearing your own voice thank somebody for a laminated insult that will make it sit better. Julian's line. The cloth coming off. That short wet laugh. My own voice saying, Preston. And then, in a room with him 3 feet from me, a fork going down on a plate, and my husband saying, Marlee understands she's a guest here. Preston put his face in his hands. Nobody comforted him. That is the detail I keep. His mother was on one side and the other seat was empty because Blythe was coloring with my daughter, and Preston Ashford sat in the middle of the front row with his face in his hands and 11 people listening to the worst thing he ever said, and not one person touched him. Then Miriam said, the last selection is timed at 9:41. Warren Ashford died at 9:14. Mrs. Ashford Sr. was present. She came downstairs at approximately 9:08 and returned to the table. Vivian said, I want a lawyer. Miriam said, yes, you do. You can hear the room behind it, because the room had gone loud. Phones, chairs, somebody saying, oh my God, twice. A woman crying, Cameron Doyle asking who had told the exchange. And close to the microphone, because Warren's device was in a drawer in the sideboard at the bottom end of that room, which is where a man puts a thing when he wants it near the cold chairs. 2 voices, low and quick. Grady. Vivian, listen to me. That agreement is dated the 9th. Her signature block is empty and he's dead. If she goes to Delacroix before we get her signed, the release is worthless. Vivian, then get her signed tonight. Grady. Her father-in-law just died. No notary in this county touches that tonight, and no judge alive would look at it after. Vivian. Grady, he said her name in that room. He said all 3 of it. That girl's grandmother's name came out of his mouth in front of 2 nurses. He said, it's in the drawer. It's been in the drawer since Tuesday. You're too late. What's in the drawer? Grady, I don't know. Vivian. You told me the North Wing was managed. Then how did she get up that stair on the 9th? And then, after a pause of about 2 seconds, in the dining room of Cordelia Hall, with her father-in-law 27 minutes dead upstairs, and a plate laid clean and white at the head of the table, Vivian Ashford said this. Get the board complaint in on Monday and get it in hard. I don't care what it does to her license. If she's a nurse who kills old men for money, then whatever comes out of that drawer came out of a confused old man who was frightened of her. And that's the end of it. And it's the end of the grandmother too. Grady, very quietly, Vivian. That's a false report to a state board. And Vivian Ashford said, then you write it so it isn't false. She was up there. She touched that pump. Write down what she did and let them draw it. Miriam stopped the recording. The fan went round. The window unit changed pitch the way they do. And out in the corridor, through a door that does not shut properly, everybody in that room heard a young woman in a nursing uniform who had come straight off a night shift start to cry. Grady said, without lifting his head, I want the record to show that I advised against that. And Miriam Delacroix said, the record shows that you filed it 11 days later. Vivian stood up, 71 years old, and she looked around that little room as though she were about to explain something about the peonies. She said, to me, straight across 3 chairs, you have no idea what that house is. I was born on Meeting Street Road, 4 blocks from that fence line. My mother cleaned for a family on Church Street for 29 years, and they gave her a coat every Christmas, and it was always a coat, and it was never a good one. Sterling Ashford married me in 1979, and his aunts did not come to the wedding. Not one of them. His grandmother sent a note that said she was praying about it. Do you know what it is to be prayed about? I have sat at the end of that table for 50 years, and I have never once been asked to speak for that family in public until the day my husband died, and there was nobody left. They took my accent out of me. I paid a woman on Wentworth Street $40 an hour in 1981 to take my own mother's voice out of my mouth, and I let her, and I would do it again. And then she looked at me and said, and you came in through the kitchen with a bag on your shoulder, and he stood in a doorway and looked at you for an hour. There it was. Not the money. She has money and always had it, and there is no version of that that would have left her hungry. He looked at her. Warren Ashford, in 50 years, had never once stood in a doorway and looked at Vivian with his hat in his hands. And then a hospice nurse from Kentucky Avenue came in through the kitchen and sang a hymn badly, and he stood in the rain on the porch over her name. I had nothing prepared. Everybody thinks I did. I planned nothing, because at 4 that morning Miriam had told me to wear something I could sit still in, and that had been the whole of my strategy. I stood up. I said, "Vivian." I said, "My grandmother was a girl from a laundry too." And I sat back down. I am not going to pretend I found the perfect thing to say to that woman, because there is no perfect thing. But I watched it land. I watched Vivian Ashford understand that the only person in that room who had actually come from where she came from was the woman she had put in the cold chair for 11 years, and that she had spent 50 years guarding a door against her own reflection. She did not speak again in that office. She left 20 minutes later with a phone against her ear asking for a firm in Columbia. I went out to the stairwell, because there is nowhere else in that building to go. Preston came out after me and stood 4 steps up and did not come down them. I knew in November 2015. I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from a document, because you're going to see a lot of documents this year. Ma sat me down in the garden room and showed me 6 pages and said there is a woman with a claim on this family, and she is 32 and she is on nights and her daddy's sick. And I said, "What do you want me to do about it?" And she said, "Be at the gala." He said, "That's the whole of my defense, and there isn't any more of it." I was 43 years old. I asked him one question. It is the only one I have ever wanted the answer to, and I have never asked it again. I said, "The shrimp and grits." He was quiet long enough that I heard the door go downstairs. That was mine. I want you to know that was mine. Nobody told me to do that. You'd said it at that table about dreaming about food, and I was in the car park at 1:30 in the morning like a fool waiting for that place to open, and I didn't know what I was doing there. And he said, "I've worked out that it's worse. It's worse that it was real. If none of it was real, then I'm just a man who did a job for his mother. If some of it was real, then I did all of it anyway." I said, "Yes." He said, "Yes. Then, is she going to know? June. Is she going to know what I did?" And that is the moment, out of all of them, when I understood I was going to be all right, because I did not have to think about the answer for even a second. I said, "She's 9. She's not going to know at 9. She'll know at 16, and she's going to hear it from you, in a room with me in it, and you're going to use the actual words. Not managed. Not complicated. You're going to say, 'I was told there was a woman with a claim, and I was sent to marry her.'" He said, "Marlee." I said, "That's the price. That's the whole price, and it isn't negotiable, and there's nothing else I want from you." He put his hand over his mouth and nodded at the stairs. And then, because 11 years does not come off a man in 5 days, he said, "The board's going to want to know what you're going to do with the 31.4. I said, "I know they are. Go and sit down. I'll tell you at the same time as everybody else." In the 4 days between the reading and the board meeting, a great deal happened fast, and the order matters. Ada Sowell filed a petition for correction of inventorship on patent 3,047,116, with the laundry ticket, the personnel record, Warren's 2007 affidavit, and 14 pages on a radius that had no engineering reason to exist. Miriam lodged the 2006 restitution instrument with the probate court, with Grady's marginal note, and her own October 2006 letter asking why it had not come back. Tanisha Boyd gave a statement with a union representative present, because I insisted on it, confirming the name Warren said at 9:10 in the note she made at the time. The state board received 11 hours of audio and a transcript of 9:41, and on the Monday afternoon closed the complaint against my license. The letter uses the words "no basis in fact," and I have that letter framed. Not the ship, not the plaque. That letter. Vivian retained a firm in Columbia whose first letter used the phrase "without any admission whatsoever" 4 times in 2 pages. Grady Whitlock resigned as general counsel on the Sunday night by email at 11:20. On the Monday morning, he delivered to Miriam's office by hand a banker's box containing the estate office's 2006 file, the 2015 benefit paperwork with a seating diagram in Vivian's handwriting and a printer's proof stapled to it, and the engagement summary in its original folder with his own margin notes intact. There was no letter, just a box, and his card in the top of it with nothing written on the back. I have not decided what I think about that man, and I have stopped trying. So on the Tuesday, I walked into the room on the 8th floor of the building on Concord Street, with the harbor in the window and 100 years of chairman on the wall, holding 31.4% of a company my grandmother worked for, in a dress I bought at Belk on the Monday with my own money. And there were 9 people at that table, and none of them looked at my shoes. Preston was there. He is the chief financial officer. He had to be. He sat 4 down on the left and did not speak once. Vivian was not. Her counsel had advised against it, and it was the only good advice that woman got all week. Cameron Doyle asked whether I intended to seek a seat. I said not today, and then I put a single sheet on that table. I had written it in longhand on the Sunday at my father's kitchen table, 4 feet from where a woman drew a shape on the back of a laundry ticket in 1961, and Miriam had typed it and made it grammatical and had not changed one of the terms. 7 of them. The 2006 restitution instrument counter-executed inside 30 days at present value, without litigation and without a confidentiality provision of any kind. Not a settlement. The instrument the chairman signed in 2006, honored as written, 20 years late. No opposition to the petition for correction of inventorship, and a letter to the patent office in support of it. I did not ask them to be silent. I asked them to say it out loud. Building 39 at Union Pier renamed the Ruth Hale Building, with a cast plaque at the door, and the wording of the plaque mine, and not the marketing department's. Vivian Ashford to resign from the company board and the foundation board with immediate effect, and no indemnity payment towards her defense of any matter arising out of the false report or the alteration of a document, and no application to treat either as a company matter. The referral to the Attorney General's office was already made. I did not ask them to make it. I asked them not to pay to stop it. A written retraction of the complaint, signed by the complainant, filed in the case record. Already done by then, but I wanted it in the minutes. The note on Kentucky Avenue released, and the deed transferred to Elijah Hale within 7 days. Palmetto Reach Holdings wound up, and every other residential note that entity held in North Charleston brought to the audit committee, because I had asked Miriam whether my father was the only one, and she said, "Marlee, there are 19 houses, and the foundation to fund, out of the regatta line and not out of any new money, a palliative outreach program for North Charleston. For nurses, 2 cars, a bereavement telephone line staffed by people who are paid, and home visits." I read the 7th one out, and then I put 11 pages on the table on top of the single sheet, with a coffee ring on the front page from 2024, and I said, "This is the version I gave your husband's son in the car." I did not ask for a house. Not the Laguerre Street property, not the place at Kiowa, not the boat. And my lawyers thought I was mad. And Ada Soul told me in the corridor that in 26 years, she had never once had to talk a client up. I did not want to live in anything of theirs. I have slept on a bare mattress in a guest cottage at the bottom of that garden, and I know exactly what their rooms are worth. Cameron Doyle asked whether the terms were conditional. I said, the shares vote either way. I'd rather you did it because it's right. But they vote either way. There is a thing that happens in a room when everybody understands the arithmetic at the same moment, and it is very quiet. Blythe is on the foundation board, and she came in for the 7th and voted for it with her chin up and her mother's phone ringing in her handbag, which she did not answer. Afterwards in the corridor she said, "I filed that diagram, Marlee. I was 27 and I filed it, and I never once looked at it again." And I said, "You gave it to me." And she said, "That's not the same thing." She is right, and I let her keep that, because it is hers to carry, and it is not much. Julian voted his small holding by proxy from a treatment facility in Asheville, where he had checked himself in on the Sunday, and the proxy form has a handwritten line at the bottom that was not required. For Ruth Hale, and I'm sorry I never asked. Preston voted last. He voted for all 7 and did not look up, and I want to be honest about what that was worth. It cost him nothing. The block had already carried. But he did one thing that week that nobody made him do and nobody was watching, and I only learned about it in October. He wrote to the state board himself. 1 page, plain paper, no letterhead, no lawyer, stating that he had been present at a dinner on the 12th, that he had heard the complaint discussed before it was filed, and that he wished to place on record that in 11 years of marriage he had never known his wife to be anything other than meticulous with a patient. Signed, Notarist, sent by certified post. It arrived 4 days after they had already closed the case, so it changed absolutely nothing, and he sent it anyway. I am not going to tell you that redeems him. It does not. I am telling you because when my daughter is 16 and sitting in a room with both of us hearing the actual words, she is going to need something true to hold that is not only the worst thing about her father, and I have decided that she gets to have that one. The correction of inventorship came through the following spring. It takes months, and there is nothing cinematic about it. It arrives as a document with a case number, and the wording is bureaucratic, and Ada Soul read it out over the telephone in a voice that shook once. United States Patent 3,047,116. Inventor, corrected, Ruth Ellen Hale, Charleston County, South Carolina. 65 years. My grandmother has been dead for 27 of them. The Post and Courier ran it on the front of the local section, and the Associated Press carried it for about 36 hours. And then something else happened somewhere else, the way it does. But in that 36 hours, for things happened I did not expect. A man in Portland, Oregon, aged 81, wrote me 2 pages about his mother, who had done a similar thing at a tire plant in Akron in 1958, and asked how to start. A teacher in Somerville put the laundry ticket on the wall of her classroom. A woman rang the palliative outreach line 6 weeks after it opened and asked for a nurse for her husband, and when they asked how she had heard of us, she said, "The lady with the grandmother." And Rooster Pinkney, 92, sent a message by way of his great-niece to say that he had told them, and that he wanted it known that he had told them, and that he would be at the christening if somebody would come and get him. Ashford Maritime does not build vessels anymore, but they buy them and they name them. And there was a harbor tug coming in from a builder in Louisiana that year with a hull number and no name. They wanted to call it Ruth Hale. I said no. Her name goes on the building. She was not a boat. She was a woman who worked in that building for 8 years and got $11. And I said, put the ticket on it. So the tug that came up the Cooper River that October, 78 feet of it, blue and white with a black stack, has painted on the bow in letters 2 feet high, and on the plaque in the wheelhouse, and on the plate on the wall at Union Pier, the words she wrote in pencil on the back of a laundry ticket at a kitchen table on Kentucky Avenue on the 4th of December 1961. Not the Mackin, spelled the way she spelled it. I fought about that for 3 weeks. Marketing wanted it corrected. A man on the communications team wrote me a memo about brand perception, and I read all 4 pages, and then rang him and asked whether he thought a woman who had been given $11 and a ham needed her spelling fixed by him. It says not the Mackin in her hand, traced from the original and cut in brass. 600 people at the yard that morning. Company, the Union, half of North Charleston, 11 of the 19 families whose notes had gone to the audit committee, my whole church, and the entire palliative unit, including 4 people who had come off nights and were falling asleep standing up, and Danita Reeves in a hat you could have landed a helicopter on. Ophelia Beckett came in her own clothes and would not sit in the front row until I made her. Tanisha brought her mother. Miriam stood at the back with her arms folded and her glasses up in her hair, and when I looked round for her at the end she had gone. Blythe brought June. Preston came and stood towards the back and did not come forward, which was the correct decision, and I noted it. Rooster Pinkney was fetched in a car and sat in the front row in a gray suit with a deacon's pin, holding his cane between his knees with both hands. And when they read out the correction of inventorship over the loudspeaker, he put his head back and said, out loud, to nobody, "There it is." And my father stood up. Elijah Hale, 69 years old, 31 years a welder at that yard, in a new suit that Blythe of all people had taken him to be measured for, standing on a dock at the place where he worked from 1976 to 2007, at the christening of a vessel carrying his mother's words. The shaking that morning was as bad as I have seen it. It comes worse with adrenaline. He had his left hand jammed in his jacket pocket and could not get it out. They gave him the bottle on the lanyard. He got both hands on it, and I saw him understand that he was not going to be able to do it, and I saw his jaw go. And there is a photograph of that moment in the paper, and I cannot look at it. I came and stood behind him and put my hands over his hands. His hands were shaking and mine were not, and I want to say something about that, because I have had a long time to think about what my grandmother actually gave me, and it was not a lawsuit. It was steady hands. She gave them to my father, and 31 years of welding took them back off him, and he gave them to me. And I have used them for 15 years on the last 4 days of strangers' lives. And on a Saturday morning in October, I used them to hold my father's hands round a bottle of champagne on a lanyard at the Union Pier yard. We swung twice and nothing happened, which is normal, and everybody laughed, and the third time it went properly, all down the bow in the sun. And my father put his forehead on the back of my hand and stood there a moment with 600 people clapping, and then straightened up and said, in a completely ordinary voice, "Well, Mama." That is what he said. "Well, Mama." And it is better than anything I could have written for him. June read the plaque. She practiced for a week and stood on a wooden box at the door of the building and read it to 600 people in the voice she uses for church. This building is named for Ruth Ellen Hale, 1935 to 1999, who pressed laundry in Building 39 from 1954 to 1962. In 1961, she solved a seal failure that this company's engineers had worked on for 8 months, drawing the profile on the back of a laundry ticket at her kitchen table on Kentucky Avenue. The company took the drawing, paid her $11 and a ham, and put another man's name on the patent. This is a correction. It is 65 years late. She was right, and she was not the machine. She read the $11. I made them keep the $11 on it. There was a meeting about it. There was actually a meeting, and a woman from communications said the sum was needlessly specific, and I said that was the point, and Miriam Delacroix said, "The client's position on the $11 is settled," in a voice that closed the meeting. 100 years of that company is on a wall on the 8th floor in 9 framed portraits, and the whole of my grandmother's share of it was $11. And if you round that off, then in 40 years somebody will say the family did the right thing eventually, and that is not what happened. What happened is that they took it, and kept it for 65 years, and gave it back only because a deaf old man put a recorder in a drawer and a 9-year-old girl remembered a page from a school project. Put the number on the plaque. Always put the number on the plaque. I went back to work in January. Not to the foundation, and not to the trust, although I chair the trust and sit in a room 4 times a year and sign things. And it pays for the 4 nurses and the 2 cars and the telephone line. And it will still be paying for them when my daughter is my age. I went back to nursing. Danita rang me on a Thursday in November and said the unit had 2 vacancies and that if I made her say it out loud, she would never forgive me. Nights, 4 out of 7, Sunday to Wednesday. My own name on my own badge, spelled right. The teal scrubs out of the bottom drawer of a dresser in a rented house on a street I chose myself, washed and worn out, and replaced by new ones that I bought. I have a patient at the moment, a woman of 88 on the 4th floor in a room with a window that does not open, which is the thing I am fighting about with the estates department this month, and I intend to win. She was frightened of the dark, and now she is not. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, she likes somebody to sing. So I sing, badly, in a key I invent as I go, the way I did in a room in the north wing of a house on the Ashley River 11 years ago, in front of a man standing in a doorway with rain on his shoulders, who watched his wife laugh at him for the better part of an hour, and then went out onto a landing and asked me my name. "Hell," I said. They spent 11 years teaching me my place at that table, in the cold chair, by the window, at the end. My grandmother got $11 and a ham for the thing that built the whole house, and she never saw one single day of this, and I would trade the tug and the trust and the plaque and every dollar of it for one afternoon of her sitting on that porch under the fig tree with the paper in her lap, reading her own name. I cannot have that. So I did the other thing. I took her name back, and I put it on a building where she stood at a press for 8 years, and I gave it to my daughter to keep. Ask me which one of us won.